Hey guys, and welcome to British Guy Reacts. It is such a pleasure to have you with me today. Now, I launched this channel to do two main things, other than covering up my existential dread, fear of death, etc. Firstly, I wanted to make videos about American culture, so my fascination of America, my Americophilia, I suppose. And second of all, I wanted to make videos about history, which is another of my obsessions. And generally I've managed to get those two to combine quite neatly, so I've done a lot of videos on American history. But this video is going to be more general history. I'm going to react to Oversimplified, the First World War. It's actually the very first video that the Oversimplified channel did. Quite a short video, about 6 minutes. And coming down the line, there will also be some videos exclusively about American culture and not so much about history. So I'm kind of expanding out a little bit. I had hoped to record this video a couple of days ago, but it didn't quite work out. I've actually been quite busy recently, so I started a new job. I am a kind of courier driver in London. I deliver baking powder, which I know sounds weird, but I deliver baking powder to parties across London. So it's mainly bankers, a lot of media people, even some celebrities. And the markup is insane on baking powder. Seriously, it's incredible. I don't know how I got so popular. I think maybe it's got something to the Great British Bake Off. But yeah, anyway, this stuff is worth huge amounts of money. Especially if it comes from Colombia for some reason. People always ask, is this Colombian baking powder? Well, they don't actually say baking powder, they say, is this from Colombia? So presumably Colombia must specialise in baking powder for some reason. But yeah, so I've been quite busy with that, so I haven't had quite so much time. It can be a bit of a boring job, but my boss, to make it a bit more exciting, we play this game where whilst I'm making my deliveries, I have to try and avoid the police. You know, just to make, you know, it makes things a bit more exciting. So no, obviously none of that's true. I actually run a protection racket. So I'm going to react to World War I Oversimplified Part 1. Now, this is actually a time period I know slightly more about, so I will actually probably be able to make a few more contributions other than just going, wow, this is amazing, which is my kind of usual reaction to most history I don't know about. So let's launch play the video.
The world in 1914, a time of modern technology, culture,
Charlie Chaplin.
and fashion. Truly the height of civilization. Let's have a war.
Yeah.
Everyone knew a big war was coming. France wanted some stuff back that Germany had taken from it.
Yeah.
Germany wanted to take more of
So
everyone's stuff.
France lost. Sorry, is it paused?
Building a big, sexy navy that was making.
Now, please pause. Thank you. So France lost Alsace-Lorraine during the Franco-Prussian War, and it was just a huge blow to French pride. They became obsessed with taking it back. Germany felt sandwiched between Russia and France. Britain was terrified by the fact that Germany was building a huge... I mean, Germany wanted an overseas empire to match Britain and France, and as part of that, it was building a big navy. This terrified Britain. So you had a whole series of kind of different interlocking conflicts, which resulted in these two alliance systems between the Central Powers, which was Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy, although Italy would later change sides, and the Entente Powers, which was France and Russia, and kind of Britain. Britain was semi-detached. And these two great alliances faced off, and it meant that any spark anywhere in Europe could spark a global war, a world war, which is exactly what happened. A relatively minor, well, what could have been a relatively minor conflict led to one of the most deadly wars in human history. I mean, there's a great line in Blackadder, which is like a UK comedy series, but it was a perfect plan in every way except for one problem, and that's that it was bollocks. And that's basically true. So as I say, I'm sure they'll get more into this, but that's the very brief introduction.
British uncomfortable. These two empires thought they were really cool, but lots of different people who lived there didn't think it was so cool. And some of them had even been declaring independence.
Yeah, so in the early 20th century, there were two Balkan Wars, during which the Ottoman Empire fought various of its neighbours, and its neighbours fought amongst themselves. But basically, the Ottoman Empire was pushed out of most of the Balkans. I mean, it had been losing territory for a long while, but it really intensified. And you had two very unstable empires, so the Ottomans and the Austro-Hungarians, both of whom were challenged by these new nationalisms. And as the Ottoman Empire retreated, it put more pressure on the Austro-Hungarian Empire with things like Serb nationalism. So yeah, and this becomes the really quite small spark which sets the entire of Europe alive. And I love Germany's blood is hairy. I hear Russia likes Nickelback. Yeah. As people are so down on Nickelback, I'm not going to defend Nickelback, but they got one or two good songs. Anyway, Let's
talking
carry
about
on.
each other behind each other's backs, throw in the fact that military technology had come
Look
a
at the
long
size
way
of that
since the last
gun.
major war, and suddenly everyone was pretty eager to beat each other up.
Yeah.
In this area of Austria-Hungary lived some Serbs and Bosnians who hated living in Austria-Hungary. So
Right.
the Austro-Hungarian Archduke Franz Ferdinand goes there for a nice drive in an open-top car with his car's route published in advance. And that went
Essential
just
tips
about
for
as well as you'd
assassinating world
expect.
leaders.
Some assassins were waiting for him along the way and threw bombs at his car, but they missed and blew up some officers behind him instead. So the Archduke goes into hiding, leaves Sarajevo, and the whole war never happened. Except no, the Archduke doesn't leave, but instead goes back out in the open-top car to visit the injured officers in hospital.
Oh.
The driver takes a wrong turn, and by sheer
That's
coincidence
interesting.
gets stuck beside one of the victims.
I didn't know that. So, I mean, okay, that's massively improved my opinion of the guy. Like, if someone chucks a bomb at me in a city, I'm getting the fuck out of there. I'm not going to the hospital to visit the wounded. I mean, that's a nice thing to do, but I'm getting out of there. So, yeah, my respect for the Archduke Franz Ferdinand has increased dramatically.
Failed assassins. Who shoots him?
Ooh. So, the guy that fired the shot was... Can I pause you? Thank you. The guy that fired the shot was a guy called Gabriel Princely, or Princliffe, I think. But he was affiliated to a group called the Black Hand, which was a big Serb nationalist group. Or not that big, but it was a Serb nationalist group. And there have always been allegations about how much was the Black Hand linked to Serbian intelligence, to the Serbian state. And it's still a bit of an open question. I mean, clearly some people within Serbian intelligence were supporting them, but was this a kind of statewide conspiracy, or was it just some people going rogue, or kind of doing freelance stuff? I kind of suspect the latter, but it's an interesting question as to what extent the Serbian state was responsible. And obviously the Austro-Hungarians held them responsible, hence the war.
The Serbian government had something to do with it, which they might have.
Yeah.
So they go to their ally Germany and say, hey Germany, we're going to declare war on Serbia. And Germany is all for that.
Yeah.
So Austria-Hungary send a big list of impossible demands to Serbia, and when Serbia refuses, they declare war.
Yeah. So this is how the alliance system got triggered. So I mean, Germany basically gave Austria-Hungary a blank check. And some people blame Germany for the war because of that. I'm always a little bit sceptical about that. I mean, it's not really like the Second World War where you've got one obvious bad guy. I mean, every country in the First World War was kind of acting semi-rationally. I mean, at least to the extent that you could understand what they were thinking. It wasn't just one country woke up and went, right, I'm going to conquer all of Europe. Every country had its own interests, and then the way they became locked together in the alliance system meant that when they clashed, rather than just being a localised conflict, it became a world war. But yeah, so Germany gave Austria this blank check. I mean, some people say that Germany was quite authoritarian and militaristic then, but Russia, which was on the other side, was even more authoritarian. So there really isn't a good guy and bad guy in this conflict.
They are friends. And Serbia is protected by Russia, who's friends with France. So they'll declare war on each other. Montenegro joins in too.
I didn't know that Montenegro.
France and Britain also have a kind of alliance.
Yeah.
So when France says, hey Britain, you got my back? Britain is like, maybe. And then they decide to stay out of it, which is great for Germany, because Germany has a plan. They know that Russia is so big and clumsy that it will take them a while to get ready for war.
Yeah.
So with this guy in charge, Germany will send all
its troops
to France at lightning
helmet
speed while Russia's getting ready. Defeat France, then move all the troops to Russia and defeat Russia, and then we all speak German and eat Pfeffer podcast every day. Just one problem. France has loads of force and defenses along the German border, and Germany can't waste any time fighting them.
It very nearly worked. The Germans got quite near packed. I mean, it's very similar to what the Germans did during World War II, except they did an even bigger sideways invasion, so they went through the Netherlands as well. But yeah, no, it very nearly worked. I mean, they got stopped at the Battle of the Marne, but until then, they really got close to Paris.
So Germany decides to go around them.
Yeah, through Belgium.
Belgium is neutral, but Germany wants to march 750,000 troops through it to get around France's defences.
Right.
They're hoping Belgium will just kind of sit down and shut up, but they don't. They fight back, and they're pretty good too, so they slow the Germans down. Yeah. What's worse is that Britain shows up, and they're pretty pissed that Germany's invading neutral countries. So now Britain declares war on Germany. So Germany push on through Belgium and commit some atrocities along the way.
Yeah, so the atrocity is an interesting point. So during the Franco-Prussian War, there was the Prussians, the Germans-Prussians had a bit of an issue that when they advanced into France, sometimes they got attacked by guerrilla fighters or kind of armed civilians. And this really annoyed them. And they were terrified this was going to happen again in the First World War. So when they conquered Belgian territory, they were absolutely ruthless with any, even the semblance of any kind of sort of civilian resistance. And they committed some really nasty atrocities. And obviously for the point of view of the Allied propaganda, that was fantastic. I mean, when there's a debate about, should Britain enter the war, there became this whole thing about gallant little Belgium, fighting so bravely against the huge German Empire. Obviously, the fact that the British Empire was invading people left, right and centre at the point, sort of leave that to one side. But yeah, so they're giving a huge propaganda coup for the Allies, the behaviour of some of the German troops in Belgium.
They also wear spikes and sometimes skulls on their uniform.
Yeah.
So if you're trying to
it's are we the bad guys, isn't it?
Good job.
The
The Allies have a propaganda extravaganza, and
Yeah.
this starts having an influence around the world, notably in America. The
Okay.
US President Woodrow Wilson sees himself as a bit of a Jesus figure, and spends most of the war trying to get everyone to just hug it out. But there's also a large population of ethnic Germans living in the United
Yeah.
States, and when the war first broke out, they were like, yay, Germany.
Yeah.
But now that they're committing atrocities in Belgium, they're less enthusiastic. Let's play Spot the French Soldier.
Yes, I can see the issue.
See him? Easy, right? He's wearing a bright blue uniform with red trousers. And do you know who else spotted him easily too? The Germans.
Yeah.
So when the French were slowly marching in columns through the countryside, the Germans easily tore them to shreds with their giant guns.
So
All the
one thing
nations
that
revolted
always
in.
amazes me about the First World War is just how much technology evolved. Well, I suppose it's the same with the Second World War, which then terrifies you what might happen in the Third World War. But I mean, so you started the war with cavalry, with these absurdly bright uniforms in some cases, like the French case they just pointed out. And you ended the war with tanks, poison gas, the regular use of aircraft for kind of aerial bombardment. I mean, just the level of progress that was made was incredible and slightly terrifying. Yeah, better
This war
charge the
went in
call.
with the old school war mentality. And all of them had to update their uniforms and tactics a lot
No
during
boots
the
for
Great
the
War.
serfs. Did not know that.
Because this war was going to be like nothing anyone had ever seen before.
Yeah.
Russia's ready for war, and way earlier than expected.
Yeah.
Hey, Austria-Hungary, can you get on top of that? Oh yeah, sure, we've got this. Nope. So Germany has to send some troops back to the east to defend against the Russians. The chief of staff of the Austro-Hungarian army is this guy, and although he is handsome, he turns out not to be the best military strategist. Austria-Hungary constantly ignores Germany's advice, and then comes running back to Germany whenever they get in trouble.
So it kind of reminds me of Italy in World War II. When the Germans did turn around, there was a very big battle between Germany and Russia. Something like Tannenberg, I think. But the Russians got absolutely plastered. So this was Hindenburg and Ludendorff's great victory, and it kind of ensured their legend. And both of them would go on to play very important roles in German politics later, leading up to the rise of Nazism, which I'm sure I'll get into in a later video.
Gets its ass kicked by tiny Serbia, who repels all
Yeah.
their invasion attempts at the start of the war. It's
So-
better news for Germany in the north.
Serbia
It was
in
completely
First World
wiped out
War is
the Russian-
basically Italy. Sorry, it's basically Greece in the Second World War. Like handing it to Germany's ally when it really had no business doing so, and then getting conquered in turn by Germany.
Second Army. Back on the Western Front, the Germans continue advancing and are in sight of Paris. At this
Yeah.
point, anyone would be forgiven for thinking the Germans were going to get that quick victory after all. But
That's
then things
reasonable.
start to go wrong. The French commander-in-chief knew something had to be done, and he ordered his armies to stop retreating. In the resulting battle, a gap opened up in the German lines. If a gap opens up, the enemy can use it to flank you from the side and behind, so the German armies have to retreat. The Allies launch a counterattack, so the Germans dig into defensive positions. The Allies do the same. Then both sides move north, trying to outflank each other along the way.
I mean,
When they
it
reach the
shows
sea-
just how advantageous being a defender was at the start of the First World War because of machine guns and barbed wire, that kind of stuff. But it was actually more advantageous to hold a solid defensive line all the way from Switzerland to the English Channel than it was to have your army in kind of one punch and attack in one place. It shows just how insanely overpowered the defenders were.
They're in a stalemate with trench systems running the whole way from the coast to Switzerland, the
Yeah.
beginning of trench warfare on the Western Front. Here's how trench warfare works. Two opposing lines of trenches with no man's land in between. One side would pummel the other with hundreds of thousands of artillery shells, sometimes for days at a time.
Right.
This had a huge psychological effect on the soldiers, leaving many shell-shocked. Then, the attacking troops would leave their trenches and rush across no man's land.
Yeah.
A muddy, wet mass of shell craters and barbed wire. The defending trench would unleash machine gun fire on the attackers, inflicting thousands of casualties.
The carnage that you got in some battles was insane. So, I mean, I suppose you think particularly of Verdun and the Somme. But, I mean, there were literally times when officers would tell their men not to run. You got to walk towards enemy trenches. I mean, sometimes, there was one case, I think, on the Somme, where some British officers made their men kick footballs forward. You sort of keep up morale, but not run, because that might disturb things somehow, and then just get mown down by defenders. I mean, by the end of the First World War, they got a lot better tactically, but certainly during the kind of first and middle stages, it was an absolute bloodbath. It was just disgusting what happened.
Attackers would send wave after wave until either they gave up or the opposing trench was finally overrun.
Yeah.
There would be months of fighting and the deaths of thousands in order to gain a few meters or kilometers of land.
Yeah.
Living in the trenches was hard work too. Corpses,
Hellish.
mud that could swallow you whole, pools of poisonous water, rats, disease, the smell. It's insane that millions of soldiers put up with these conditions, and commanders ordered them to do so for years.
Yeah. That's it. That's okay. Oh, so this is actually the end. Okay. One final observation. So very interesting. They mentioned that soldiers put up for it for so long. Have I managed to pause you? Pause. Thank you. And which is very true. I mean, obviously there was a Christmas truce, very localised between British and German soldiers in the First World War, but it wasn't really until 1917 when you had major mutinies in the French and Russian armies. So it's what humans are able to put up with, or prepared to put up with, or perhaps forced to put up with in certain circumstances is insane. It's just we are one hell of a species. But yes, anyway, so that's the end of part one. Obviously, the next video will be part two. I hope you've enjoyed that. It's been really interesting. It's been an absolute pleasure having you with me. And don't forget to subscribe and like and all that good YouTube stuff.